This specific video in the series on understanding the Church of England is what I'm going to title, What Denomination is the Church of England? And that seems to be quite a fuzzy topic for a number of people. And so let's take ourselves out of the context of England, out of the context of Anglophone dioceses like North America and maybe Australia, and put ourselves into the context of other dioceses of non-Anglophone countries where you've got expatriates living, neither Anglophone natives or Anglophile speaking, that will maybe living in a context of another language, living there maybe as an expat, living there for work, or maybe married culturally, bicultural couple, and then we'll go to an English-speaking, want to go to an English-speaking church. Okay, so that's the context. And what I've seen in general is that in these certain type of contexts, the Roman Catholics will tend to go to Roman Catholic churches, okay, in general, and that's fine. In the, like we said, in all the other Anglophone dioceses, the people will go, you'll have people that go to the churches of their steak sauce, favorite steak sauce, okay, their preference. But in these non-Anglophone dioceses, where the Roman Catholics go to the churches that they go to, okay, what happens is that the Protestant people from all different Protestant denominations will come to an Anglican church, the Church of England, or Anglican communion. Okay, so I'm not going to make a distinction too much there, but I want to make that understood that they will come to an English-speaking church, and it tends to be a Church of England that happens to be in that territory region, because their own denomination is not represented there. Now, again, I said Protestant denominations of a large range and spectrum, from some conservative to charismatic. And I don't want to go through all those, but and I watch my introduction where I talk about the different Protestant churches that I come from, okay, and that will give the flavor, the range. But what I've also seen is that people will, the Protestants will come to the Anglican church, okay. So now that's a big question. Is the Church of England a Protestant denomination? And I think that there's a misconception about that. And here are the reasons why. Is that most people think that it was, Henry VIII that broke off from the Catholic Church because of his marriage, and that he became Protestant. Well, Henry VIII really remained anti-Protestant if you really do the research on it. And unfortunately, the Church of England started a millennium before. If you go back to 597, do your research about the first missionaries sent out, you'll find out that it started much before Henry VIII. And I don't want to go through all that. Go up to Wikipedia, go through the history things, go look at that. But Henry VIII did not want to be, he didn't want to separate himself from Catholicism. He just didn't. There were a couple reasons he didn't want to have. He had a political reason and his own personal reasons to, he wanted to get a divorce. But secondly, there was political reasons for that, and then he didn't want to have a foreign power actually running over it. But now what's happened is that the foreign power, the Church of England has expanded. Now you get the same problem. Okay, so it's expanded out in other ways. But so what you have to see is that the Church of England, over time, has split into 3 different flavors. And those 3 different flavors, known as the Anglo-Catholic, okay, our church, or the evangelistic, evangelical, or the liberal, okay, so you've got 3 different general flavors. These are all part of the Church of England spectrum. And if you really look at how it happens in the Anglo-Catholic, could be much closer to maybe Orthodox than the Roman Catholic. But let's just put those together in general. I don't want to go into all the details here. I'm trying to give something that's a very easy to understand general. You need to read it, go into it, and study that some more for yourself and ask more questions. I can't do this, and this video series is not made to go into deep dive in every single point. But the High Church, the liturgy, and the ritualistic aspects are from the Catholic and the Orthodox Church. There's a history of that. And, but there also, in the 1970s-ish time, there was the evangelical movements. Actually, the whole 20th century was the whole, all the Pentecostal charismatic movements. There are a number of those, and I can't go through the whole history of that as well here. But the Church of England has had influence, has been influenced by those movements, and does have an area, a flavor of that. That is represented in its denomination, okay, and then the liberals kind of, if you want to say, in the middle. So, what denomination is the Church of England? Well, it's actually all and none of the above, if you want to. It's a mixture of them. Because the split-offs that have happened in all of the Protestant denominations over preferences and all that have become separate sub-denominations or separate denominations. And so you can go, and there are churches in some, Anglophone dioceses, you've got the one on every corner, like, petrol and gas stations. So you can go to the church of your flavor. But in England, you will have, in each parish, you will have, a church will have a certain type of orientation, okay? So maybe of the evangelical type, maybe of the more high church type, but you probably, and there might be some hybrid there as well. But the thing to see is that from what I can tell, is the Anglican Church, it's tried to group three different flavors or three different denominational, I don't want to say denomination types, but three different flavors, which are usually separate denominations in the Protestant area, which is an influence. It's a movements. These are movements. It's not just denominations. But it's tried to group them. So that's why the reuniting is so important, which I've talked about reuniting and reunification in another video. That's why that's very important, because it's important to have all three that are met, the needs are met of the different flavors possibly in a church. And that's not so important maybe as England, because you can go to another parish and go to the church of a different flavor, okay? Even in the Anglican Church, the Church of England, that other flavor. But when you're in a diocese where it's non-Anglophone, you only have one church every 50, 75, 100, 200 miles, you don't really get a choice. And you can't break off and say, we are only of this orientation. It's important to have all three present, because you're going to have people coming from all different backgrounds, both Anglican traditional background and of different Anglican maybe traditional backgrounds, because you can have all three of those, plus the Protestant attenders, which will happen. That's a natural attraction because of this misconception is whether the Church of England is a Protestant church or not. What happens, people come to it thinking that it is, but it's not. It's a hybrid of all of them, and that's why it's important in these non-Anglophone dioceses for a given local chaplaincy or parish, depending where you're at, to try to represent the three and try to have it all three if possible. To have the spectrum, to welcome the people that come from different backgrounds and not try to make a distinct flavor, because there won't be the opportunity for people to go a long ways and it'll be too far. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge for people to work together, to accept that 50% of the congregation, of the attenders, of the parishioners will be Protestants coming from different flavors of that Protestant background, and that can represent or have some similarities to parts of the flavors of the Church of England, even if it's not your own personal type that you tend to favor. This is a big challenge. I think this is something that needs to be understood conceptually, both for the Anglicans and for the non-Anglicans that are coming to churches in these situations, to recognize that and to see how to work together and to be part of that united body of Christ. And not to say, I'm Anglican, I'm not Anglican, or that. You're there for a purpose, is to serve Jesus, to love Jesus, and to love Him. And regardless of your denominational background, regardless of your preference background, but to be part of the body. It's a big challenge, and I hope that this video at least discusses this, reveals that, and answers the question. The Anglican, the Church of England, is not necessarily a Protestant church. It has some tendencies to the movement that some Protestant churches, denominations have had, and the Protestants can feel that they belong to that because of the movements. But it also has other flavors which correspond to other non-Protestant denominations or religions, what do you want to call these things? They're fuzzy terms, faiths. And for people to be able to come together and worship together in one accord, following Jesus and loving the Lord with all of their heart, mind, soul, and strength. And to understand that it's not about denominational lines of demarcation when you don't have a choice to go to a church that is of your preference because of the distance, because of the availability and non-availability. And this can cause tensions. And hopefully this video can at least make those understood, and for people to work together towards unity.